Hi, I'm Daisy. At my sister's company launch, in front of 500 guests, my parents looked me dead in the eyes and called me useless. The laughter in the room wasn't just theirs, it echoed inside me for days. But what no one knew that night was, I held the proof they spent years burying, proof that everything, the company, the legacy, even my own worth, was stolen. And they knew I was about to take it all back. But what does revenge really look like when it's your own blood on the other end of it? I still remember the weight of that winter air when I stepped out of the cab onto the polished curb outside the Grand Chicago Hotel. The city lights flickered across the glass facade, and for a moment, I felt like I was about to walk into someone else's life. My sister Callista's company opening had been all over the business section of the Tribune for weeks. 500 guests, the article said, a celebration of innovation and family values. My parents had told me to dress modestly, as if I was a child again, and so here I was in a simple navy dress and a coat too plain for the crowd gathering under the chandeliers. Inside, the lobby shimmered. Crystal lights poured down from ceilings so high they seemed to belong to a cathedral. Women in sequined gowns and men in tuxedos moved like schools of fish, greeting each other with kisses on both cheeks. I adjusted the strap of my handbag and scanned for a familiar face, but the only familiar faces belonged to portraits of long-dead hotel founders. The check-in desk for the event had a neat line of name cards arranged in alphabetical order. When I finally found mine, it was at the very end, printed crookedly, my last name spelled wrong. A small arrow drawn in pen pointed to table 28 at the back of the ballroom, next to the catering staff's station. I held the card for a moment longer than necessary. People streamed past me, laughing, their perfume mingling with the smell of truffle hors d'oeuvres. Someone bumped my elbow, muttered, "Sorry," and kept walking. I forced myself to breathe evenly. This wasn't new. This was just louder than usual. The doors to the ballroom opened, releasing a rush of sound. Applause, the clink of glasses, Callista's voice rising above the crowd as she greeted guests. I followed a server carrying a tray of champagne flutes and made my way to the back of the room. My table was indeed next to the staff's prep station. A metal cart with stacked plates stood inches from my chair. Across the aisle, a photographer snapped pictures of Callista with a string of investors. He passed me twice without even lowering the camera. I sat down, smoothing my dress, pretending to check my phone. My name wasn't in the printed evening program at each seat. The cover featured Callista's portrait, smiling, ambitious, the face of the future, with a page inside thanking our beloved family for their support. My name wasn't listed, not once. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger, steadying my breath. Callista took the stage again, the spotlight catching the glitter of her diamond earrings. She thanked her team, her mentors, our parents. "I wouldn't be here without them," she said, her voice steady, rehearsed. My father Aldrich, standing off to the side, gestured for a microphone. Callista hesitated, then handed it to him. "To our pride, our shining daughter," he boomed. His voice filled the ballroom with the ease of someone used to attention. "Unlike," he paused, eyes sweeping the crowd before landing on me. "Well, some of us, who turned out rather useless." The word cracked through the speakers like a dropped glass. Useless. Feedback hissed, amplifying it, stretching the moment until it became a room-wide echo. A few guests chuckled nervously. Others exchanged glances, whispers rising like steam. My mother Vera, seated near the front, smiled a thin, polite smile, as though cruelty were good manners. I couldn't feel my hands. My ears buzzed. It was as if the chandelier lights above had melted into a single bright blur, and I was standing under it, burning. I stared down at my lap, at my own clenched fists. Not one person moved toward me, not one word of protest. It was as if the verdict had been read and everyone had agreed to nod along. I forced myself to stay still. Breathe in, breathe out. This wasn't just a slip of his tongue. This was the announcement they had always wanted to make, finally broadcast with a microphone. Memories flooded me, my father telling me at 16 to stay small, stay quiet, my mother saying, "Don't outshine your sister," Callista's awards lined up in the hallway while my college diploma sat in a drawer. Each memory landed like a stone in my chest. A server approached, offering me a glass of champagne without looking me in the eye. I took it, if only to have something to hold. My throat burned. I wanted to speak, to stand, to throw the glass, but instead I sat, nails pressing into my palm. The applause rolled on, sealing me in silence. Finally, when Callista moved on to the next part of her speech, I pushed my chair back quietly. The metal legs scraped the floor louder than I intended. No one turned. I walked slowly along the edge of the room toward the corridor leading to the restrooms, keeping my head high even as my vision blurred. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and perfume. As I passed a pair of women by the coat check, their voices dropped, but not enough. "That's the useless one, right?" one said, adjusting her pearl earring. "No wonder she's hidden in the back," the other replied, lips curling into a half smile. I didn't slow down. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing my heartbeat. In the mirror above the sinks, my face looked pale but composed. I straightened my coat, dabbed at the corner of my eyes with a tissue, and exhaled. For the first time that night, my reflection met my gaze without flinching. That was the night I understood. Silence would only bury me deeper, and I was done being buried. I didn't walk out of that ballroom, not yet. I stayed behind the closed door of the restroom for a few minutes, gripping the edge of the marble sink until my knuckles turned white. The sound of Callista's speech drifted in through the vent, applause, laughter, clinking glasses, and I felt like I was on the other side of a glass wall, invisible and mute. Cold water ran over my hands and splashed onto my face. I dabbed at my cheeks with a paper towel, smoothing my hair back. My reflection stared at me, eyes sharp now instead of hollow. I straightened my coat and walked back into the corridor, forcing my breathing into an even rhythm. If I stayed in here, they would think they had won. If I ran away, it would be exactly what they expected. So I walked back into that ballroom with my head high, my heels clicking against the marble like a metronome. Inside, the celebration had grown louder. Champagne towers glistened, servers moved in synchronized patterns, and Callista's laugh floated across the room like a bell. I moved along the edge of the crowd, scanning faces. Not one turned toward me. To them, I wasn't part of this night. I was just an extra who had wandered into the wrong scene. I reached my table again, sitting down quietly, pretending to adjust my phone. A commotion stirred near the stage. Callista had gathered our parents, investors, and key employees for a family photo. Photographers lined up, cameras ready. I hesitated, then stood, smoothing my dress and making my way toward the group. Before I could step onto the small riser where they were arranging people, a young photographer blocked my path with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, ma'am," he said softly, glancing at his clipboard. "You're not on the list for this shot." "I'm her sister," I said, my voice even. His expression didn't change. "I understand, but it's a curated photo. Maybe later tonight." Behind him, Callista adjusted her gown, tilting her face toward the lights. She didn't look at me. She didn't even flinch. My parents flanked her like a coronation portrait, our father's arm draped proudly over her shoulder, my mother's hand clasping Callista's wrist. Their smiles were perfect. Mine was absent. I stepped back, my heels sinking slightly into the carpet. The flashbulbs went off, capturing a moment that would be on business blogs by morning. Callista and her loving family, with no sign of me. I felt the sting crawl up my spine, but refused to give them a show. Across the ballroom, a slideshow played on giant screens, images of Callista's journey from college to entrepreneur, each slide thanking family support. My name wasn't anywhere. It wasn't even in the tiny print at the bottom. I recognized some of my own ideas in those slides, the logo I'd helped her sketch, the tagline I'd brainstormed one night years ago, but no credit. Only Callista, radiant, self-made. I moved to the edge of the room, leaning against a pillar, my hands curled around the clutch bag in my lap. I watched as people I'd known since childhood embraced her, kissed her cheek, praised her brilliance. They glanced at me like I was staff, someone to bring them another drink. The memory of a phone call from 3 days ago drifted back. My mother's voice, sweet but firm. Don't overdress, sweetheart. This isn't about you. Keep it simple. At the time, I'd thought it was kindness, advice about blending in. Now, watching Callista glow in her designer gown while I stood in a navy dress from last season, I understood. It wasn't advice. It was a calculated move to ensure I looked like a nobody next to her. I felt my jaw tighten. Every detail had been planned. Where I sat, what I wore, even whether my name appeared on a list. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had erased me. Minutes passed. Guests kept streaming by, oblivious. Someone asked me where the restroom was, mistaking me for a hotel employee. I pointed them in the right direction without answering. Another guest handed me an empty glass, murmuring, "Thanks," as though I'd just cleared their plate. I stood there, a ghost in my own family's celebration. The humiliation wasn't a sharp stab anymore. It was a slow, suffocating tide. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, rising. But beneath it, something else stirred, an anger as steady as a heartbeat. I looked back at the stage. Callista laughed, leaning in to whisper something to my mother. My father raised a glass. For a moment, the light shifted and her gaze swept the room. Our eyes met. She didn't blink, didn't smile. She simply looked through me, like a window. That was the moment I realized I was standing at the edge of a room I'd been pushed out of all my life. It wasn't a slip, it wasn't an accident, it was the plan, and I was done standing still. I turned and walked slowly toward the exit, weaving between tables and guests. The hotel doors hissed open, and the winter night rushed in, sharp, honest, biting at my cheeks. My heels clicked against the marble floor of the vestibule as I stepped outside. The city spread out before me, lights flickering off the river. I inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill my lungs. "If I don't leave now," I whispered to myself, "they'll erase me completely." I pulled my phone from my bag, meaning to call a cab, when the screen lit up with a new message. It glowed against the darkness like a small beacon. My thumb hovered over it, my pulse quickening. That was when a message lit up my phone, the only light in the darkest night of my life. The screen of my phone glowed in my hand, a small square of light against the deep winter dark. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the street lamps, landing on my coat before melting into tiny silver dots. My fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the sudden jolt of seeing a name I hadn't expected in years, Mildred. Mildred had been my late aunt's closest friend, a retired teacher with sharp eyes and a soft voice. When I was younger, she used to sit with me at the kitchen table while Callista basked in my parents' attention. She would watch me draw, nodding with quiet approval. After my aunt passed away, Mildred faded from our lives like an old photograph left in the sun. Now, out of nowhere, her name was on my screen. Saw the event online. Come see me tomorrow. You shouldn't be alone tonight. I stood under the awning of the hotel, reading the message twice, 3 times. Relief flickered for a moment, warm as a candle flame. Someone had seen me, someone had noticed, then hesitation crept in. Why now? Why reach out after all these years of silence? I slipped my phone back into my bag and stepped off the curb. The doorman gave me a curious glance, but said nothing. I walked east, away from the noise of the ballroom, heels in hand so I could move faster. My feet ached from standing all night. The city hummed with life, neon signs flickering over bars, the faint thud of bass from a nightclub down the block, laughter spilling out of doorways. All of it was a sharp contrast to the quiet in my chest. As I walked, my thoughts unspooled like thread. My family had always dismissed me. Even tonight, the humiliation wasn't just about a word into a microphone. It was about years of being the afterthought, the quiet one, the one told to make herself useful in the background. They had built a life where I was optional. I remembered one evening long ago, when I was 9, a family dinner at our old house. I'd spent hours drawing a portrait of all of us, hoping to show my father what I could do. When dessert came, I brought the drawing to the table, shy but proud. Callista had just gotten straight A's, and my parents were praising her, clinking glasses of sparkling cider. I slid the paper toward my father. He glanced at it for less than a second. "Art is nice," he said, turning back to Callista. but useless in the real world. Useless. The word landed like a stamp. Even now, decades later, it echoed in my head. Tonight, it had been broadcast through a microphone, but really, it had been there all along, humming under every conversation. I pulled my coat tighter, crossing a slushy intersection. A bus roared by, spraying dirty water onto the curb. I sidestepped, my heels swinging from my fingers. My apartment was 10 blocks away. The cold bit at my ankles, but the walk felt necessary, like a cleansing. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, but a call. Mildred's name appeared once more. I hesitated, then answered. Daisy? Her voice was the same as I remembered, low, deliberate, with a hint of warmth. I thought you might not pick up. I wasn't sure it was really you, I admitted. My voice sounded small, even to me. I saw what happened tonight, she said. They don't see you because they don't want to, but I do. Come tomorrow morning. There are things you don't know. I stopped walking for a moment, leaning against a streetlight. The snowflakes melted on my cheeks like tears. Things I don't know? I repeated. About your family. About why they've kept you small. Her tone was steady, like a teacher guiding a nervous student. I can't explain on the phone. Just come 9 o'clock. You remember my place? I do. Good. She paused. And Daisy, tonight doesn't define you. They don't get to do that. I swallowed hard, staring at the dark windows of an office building across the street. Thank you, I whispered. When we hung up, I started walking again, slower now. The city had thinned. Fewer cars, more empty sidewalks. My reflection appeared in every shop window I passed. A woman in a wrinkled dress, hair pinned but loosening, barefoot in the snow with her shoes dangling from one hand. But my eyes in that reflection looked different, alert, calculating, no longer stunned. I reached my building and climbed the stairs to my apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and radiator heat. As I slid the key into the lock, I glanced up at my window. A single light glowed inside. I'd left a lamp on. For a moment, the sight steadied me. Maybe tomorrow, I thought, I'll finally learn why they need me small. I stepped inside, set my heels on the mat, and closed the door behind me. The quiet wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, but it didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like a pause before something began. The old oak door to Mildred's townhouse groaned as I pushed it open before sunrise. My fingers were stiff, not just from the cold that clung to the morning air, but from the anticipation coiled tight inside me. The air outside had been sharp and biting. Here, the interior breathed warmth and something older, softer, lavender and paper, the scent of age and memory. It was the kind of smell that pulled at threads of childhood, whispers of forgotten voices, promises once made and later broken. For a moment, I lingered in the narrow hallway, my shadow stretched long by the slant of early light sneaking through thin windows. I felt both small and, paradoxically, resolute. Mildred waited for me in the parlor, her thin frame curled slightly in a high-backed chair. On the small round table before her, 2 cups of tea steamed in faded china, their edges chipped but lovingly kept. 1 cup smelled of ginger, the other chamomile. She gestured gently toward the chair opposite her. You came, she said, in a voice neither surprised nor questioning, just steady, as though she had known I would. I slipped my coat from my shoulders and draped it over the chair before lowering myself down. My eyes, however, were drawn not to the tea, but to the wooden box resting at the center of the table. Its edges were frayed, the lacquer worn dull with years of being handled. It was unassuming, almost ordinary, and yet my breath caught as I realized that whatever lived inside that box had been waiting for me. Mildred's fingers, slow but deliberate, unlatched the box. The hinges creaked softly as she lifted the lid, releasing the faint smell of dust and time. Inside were folders, their corners curling, and ledgers whose spines were softened with wear. She eased them into the light with the reverence of someone who knew exactly what they held. I leaned forward. My pulse thrummed in my ears as I caught sight of the words inked across yellowed pages. Property deeds, share distributions, tax statements, all meticulously recorded in a neat, unwavering hand. And then, there it was, my name, Daisy Marin, written clearly, not scribbled in as an afterthought, not hidden in footnotes or appendices. My name aligned with accounts I had never known existed, shares in properties, inheritance rights that had always been mine by law, but never by recognition. The air seemed to thicken. My voice escaped as a whisper, thin but trembling with the weight of discovery. This was supposed to be Callista's? Mildred's gaze softened. She reached into the box again, withdrawing 2 documents, thicker than the rest. Her sigh carried years of burden. They've been rewriting the story for years, she said. You were never useless, Daisy. You were never invisible. You were a threat. And threats, in families like this, don't get acknowledged. They get rewritten. She slid the papers toward me, the edges brushing my fingertips. I lowered my eyes to the documents. The original trust, the ink faded but legible, bore typed signatures and careful seals. My name wasn't absent. It was central. It was clear. I had been there all along, hidden under layers of lies. A memory unspooled without warning. I was younger then, barely more than a girl, passing by my father's study door. The lamplight had cast his shadow long across the floorboards, his voice low, muttering to Callista. Don't worry, you'll get everything. Daisy doesn't have the drive. The words had frozen me in the hallway. My heart had lodged like a stone in my throat. He'd spoken them softly, carefully, with just enough caution to avoid being overheard by anyone but the walls, and me. At the time, I had believed it was doubt, disappointment. Now, staring at my rightful place in black ink, I understood. It hadn't been doubt at all. It had been calculation. Betrayal twisted in my bones like an old ache returning with the weather. Every year of being dismissed, every effort rendered invisible, every quiet kindness ignored, they had not been accidents. They had been design. I closed my eyes, biting my lip until I tasted iron, as if to ground myself in something real. Mildred's voice pulled me back. You can't confront them yet, not until you're ready. Knowledge isn't a sword if you swing it blindly. Knowledge is only a weapon if you choose the moment. Patience, Daisy. Patience is your ally now. Her words struck against the storm inside me. My mind raced with images of storming into their home, throwing these papers onto their dinner table, demanding justice, demanding they look at me and see me. I wanted to scream, to tear down their carefully crafted walls of deception. But even as the fire burned, I knew it wasn't time. If I moved too soon, they would twist it, as they always had. Patience, Mildred said. I forced myself to nod. We carefully packed several documents into a manila envelope. When I stood, the weight of it felt heavier than its paper contents should allow. It wasn't just paper. It was proof. It was a reclamation. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket as I reached for it. A voicemail notification blinked. I pressed play, and the voice that spilled out made me still. We need to talk, tonight. It was my father's voice, hoarse, cracked in a way I had never heard before. The room around me blurred. I gripped the envelope tighter. 100 questions crowded my mind, but none had answers yet. What had he known? What had he hidden? Why now? I left the townhouse and stepped into the brightness of morning. The sky was pale, the city stirring awake. My breath misted in the air, rising, disappearing. The envelope swung heavily at my side, pulling my arm down with its unseen weight. As I walked down the quiet street, the truth settled into me with the gravity of stone. This was no longer the silence before a storm. This was the storm itself, building, rolling closer with every step. And I was no longer just bracing for it. I was carrying it with me, ready to decide when and where it would break. When I pressed play, my father's voice filled the room, low, gravelly, almost unrecognizable. It wasn't the commanding timbre I remembered from my childhood or the smooth performance he used in boardrooms. This was raw, fractured, threaded with age and wear. Daisy, he said, pausing as though the word itself were difficult for him. Come to dinner tonight. It's time we clear the air. And then, silence. The line went dead. No apology, no tenderness, no acknowledgement of the years I had been cut out, erased, rewritten. Just an order. camouflaged as an invitation. I stood motionless by the window of my apartment, the phone still warm in my hand, the manila envelope of documents pressed against my chest. Outside, snow fell in fine spirals, dusting the sidewalks in white like sifted flour. Each flake spun downward in silence, but I could hear my pulse quicken. Not from fear, never fear, but from the clarity of knowing what this dinner really meant. They believed that one staged evening could draw me back into their script, back into the role they had written for me, the silent daughter, the pliable sister, the scapegoat. They were wrong. Still, I slid the papers carefully into my bag. If there was to be a reckoning, I would not walk into it empty-handed. By dusk, I was driving toward the estate. The sky had darkened into a heavy slate, and my headlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the winter haze. The road twisted through skeletal trees and across frozen lawns, every mile carrying me closer to the house I had once called home. Yet when it finally appeared, rising out of the gloom with its colonial columns and amber-lit windows, I felt my chest tighten. I pulled into the driveway but did not park close. Instead, I stopped at the far edge, letting the engine idle. I sat there for a moment, staring at the familiar facade, its shutters neatly painted, its hedges trimmed with military precision. How many nights had I walked up these steps with hope in my chest, only to leave feeling smaller? I shut off the engine. The silence rang in my ears. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and polished wood. The long dining table gleamed under candlelight, each place setting perfect, each silver candlestick polished to a shine. Callista sat at the head of the table as though she had been born there, her hair cascading in glossy waves, her nails tapping the wood with the rhythm of a metronome. Vera hovered near the fireplace, her smile faint and deliberate, her eyes watchful. And Aldrich, my father, poured himself a drink at the sideboard with the practiced elegance of a man who had never lifted a hand to clean his own glass. "Daisy," he said, turning toward me with a warmth that felt manufactured. "You came." I shrugged out of my coat and moved toward the seat they had left for me, at the far end of the table, deliberately distant from the head, a symbolic exile, a reminder of where they believed I belonged. "We're glad you're here," Vera said as she placed a plate in front of me. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes betrayed her unease, darting toward the envelope I slid under the edge of my chair. "You've been so distant lately. We only want what's best for you." Callista leaned back in her chair, her smirk small but sharp. "We've been thinking," she said, her tone smooth, practiced. "There's a place for you at the company, something small, manageable. You'd be part of the team." I let her words hang in the air, then repeated them slowly. "Something small and manageable." "Of course," she said, her eyes glinting. "It's about finding your place." Aldrich swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his gaze heavy on me. "We're offering you stability, Daisy. You've been drifting long enough." Stability. I nearly laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. Stability from the same people who had erased me from photographs, cut my name from documents, and rewritten history so cleanly that the world believed I had never mattered. I leaned forward, folding my hands calmly on the table. "If you keep underestimating me," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "you'll regret it. I have more power than you think." For a heartbeat, the room went still. Then Aldrich chuckled low, as though I had told a childish joke. Vera smiled thinly, her lips trembling just enough to seem maternal. Callista tilted her head, pity painted across her features. "Oh, Daisy," she said softly, "don't do this. You're tired. You've had a rough week. We're trying to help." "Help," I repeated, letting the word roll bitterly across my tongue. "Look," Vera said, her voice pitched with a trembling sincerity that almost convinced me. "We've made mistakes. But you're our daughter. We want to bring you in before things get out of hand." Out of hand. The phrase sliced through me. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a leash. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of the legs against the polished hardwood echoed louder than any of their words. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, "but I won't be part of a lie anymore." I stood, gathering my bag. The envelope pressed solid against my side, a reminder of what I carried now. Proof, not just hurt. Callista rose as I turned. She circled the table with the grace of a predator. Leaning close, her perfume sharp and deliberate, she whispered words meant only for me. You've always been nothing. Don't forget it. My grip tightened on the bag until my knuckles whitened, but I did not reply. I walked into the hallway, my heels striking the floor in steady, deliberate beats. I would not give her the satisfaction of a retort. Not yet. That night, back in my apartment, I laid the ledger open across my desk. The faint lamplight illuminated every line, every notation, every page of truth they had buried. My fingers traced the ink slowly, reverently. For years I had believed I was small, that my absence in their world was my fault. But here, in black and white, was the evidence. I had been rewritten, erased deliberately, because I was never weak. I was dangerous to them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the snow falling beyond the window. For the first time, I could see clearly the path forward. No shouting, no begging, only proof, wielded with precision, and in that clarity, one thought rose steady and sharp. They don't know who they're dealing with anymore. I opened my laptop just past midnight, the blue glow of the tenant-landlord's lamp stretching across the cramped walls of my little Chicago apartment. The bulb hummed faintly, throwing soft shadows over the stacks of folders and scattered envelopes spread across the table. Outside, the wind clawed at the windows, rattling the glass as if the city itself wanted in on the secret I was guarding. The taste of dinner still lingered on my tongue, not the food, but the bitterness of insult, dismissal, and a humiliating offer I would never accept. Their words replayed in my head like a needle stuck in a groove. Useless, bitter, jealous. The phrases had dug in deep, but they hadn't broken me. If anything, they had sharpened me. Now the ledger lay before me, its faded ink and scrawled signatures undeniable. Each page was a small piece of dynamite, a fuse waiting to be lit. If I prepared carefully, no one could deny the truth. Tonight, my work wasn't just to survive, it was to build my case, brick by brick, until it stood unshakable. For hours, I scanned every page Mildred and I had uncovered. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed them to glass, each whir of the scanner whispering another promise: proof, evidence, survival. Every document was photocopied, labeled, and stored in neat folders. I created digital backups and tucked them into encrypted files, hidden in places no one would ever think to look. By the time the church bells in the distance tolled 3, my kitchen table looked like a war room. An envelope of originals, a hard drive of duplicates, and a list of names scrawled across yellow paper. Investors, board members, mid-level execs, all of them had dipped their hands into the erasures. My phone buzzed with a new message. Jonas's name lit up the screen. Get your documents ready. I have a contact who can help present them safely. I typed back with steady fingers. I'm ready. At dawn, I slipped everything into a slim leather briefcase. My hands lingered on the clasp, sealing it as if I were locking away my own heartbeat. I typed a quiet email to the lawyer Mildred had recommended, attaching a short cover note and a request to schedule a protective filing. As soon as I hit send, I felt a fraction lighter, though I knew the storm was only beginning. I left the apartment with steady steps, boots crunching over salt and snow as the gray Chicago morning pressed down. Each breath fogged the air like smoke from a battlefield. By midday, the battlefield had already shifted. I ducked into a quiet cafe and cradled a cup of coffee while scrolling through my phone. My name was trending. My pulse quickened. Someone, an anonymous account with thousands of followers, had posted a thread claiming I had sabotaged Callista's event. Screenshots filled the post, faked messages made to look like mine. They painted me as desperate, vindictive, and unhinged. The replies hit harder than the post itself. Friends I hadn't seen in years, co-workers from old jobs, even strangers were piling on. What a show! Typical Daisy. Jealousy never sleeps. I felt my throat tighten. The walls of the cafe blurred. I shut my eyes and forced myself to breathe. This isn't truth. This is strategy. Instead of responding, I did what I had trained myself to do. I forwarded every link, every timestamp, every scrap of digital mud to my lawyer. I took screenshots of the replies and documented each smear. They thought they were burying me, but I was digging too, digging my own trenches, marking every move. I whispered to myself, barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine, "Let them dig their own graves." Late in the afternoon, just as I was finishing a second coffee, a notification lit up my phone. Jonas again. 2 words. She was bragging. I froze. Then another message appeared, a video screenshot attached. I tapped it open, and my sister's voice poured through the tiny speakers. The footage was grainy, dark, but unmistakable. Her laugh rang out, triumphant and sharp. It was so easy to bury her online. They won't see it coming. I dropped the phone onto the table, my chest tight with a mix of fury and clarity. This wasn't rumor. This was confession, proof that they had turned the silence I had given them into a weapon, twisting it into a story they thought would finish me off. I stood up so suddenly that the waitress glanced over. I shoved the phone back into my coat pocket and left without finishing my drink. Back in my apartment, I paced the narrow kitchen, the floor creaking under each turn. My fingers traced the envelope on the table, the ledger, my armor, my proof. They wanted war? Then war was what they would get. As night fell, I dressed in black and locked my door. The hallway light flickered overhead, but I didn't flinch. The city air was cold, sharp, bracing against my skin. I whispered into the darkness, not for anyone else, but for myself. If they want war, I'll give them one. 2 nights later, I returned to the very hall where they had mocked me, where their voices had echoed useless before 500 guests. Only this time, I wasn't empty-handed. The briefcase was in my grip, heavy with truth. My steps echoed as I crossed the marble floor. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. This was the moment the silence turned into thunder. The doors swung open, their polished brass handles gleaming under the chandeliers, and for a breathless instant, the entire gala hall seemed to inhale as one. A hush rippled across the crowd, like a sudden wind through a forest. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, champagne glasses paused halfway to painted lips, and all eyes turned toward the foyer. I paused in the doorway, just long enough to let them see me. My figure framed by the golden light spilling from the chandeliers, my coat drawn close against my body, and the weight of the leather briefcase steady in my hand. That briefcase wasn't just an accessory. It was my shield, my weapon, my living proof. I scanned the room in a single sweeping glance. Everything looked much the same as before. The marble floors polished until they mirrored the glittering gowns and tuxedos, the towering floral arrangements perfuming the air with roses and lilies, the curved staircase curling like a stage prop behind the musicians. But tonight was not the same. Tonight, I was not the trembling girl they had mocked. My steps echoed faintly as I crossed the foyer. The hush shifted into a low buzz of murmurs. I caught the looks on faces scattered among the crowd. Some pairs of eyes widened in recognition, others narrowed with suspicion or disdain. A few looked at me with pity, as if they were watching a car about to crash but couldn't look away. And then there were those who leaned forward with hunger, people who came to these events for the spectacle, hoping for a scene that would linger in gossip long after the champagne ran out. At the front of the hall stood Callista, my sister. She was radiant under the spotlights, the silk of her gown catching the light with every subtle movement. Her hair had been styled into a crown of effortless perfection, pins sparkling like stars. She smiled with the calm assurance of someone who believed the stage belonged to her alone. To anyone else, she looked like royalty. To me, she looked like a fortress built on lies. I walked deliberately, each step a small act of defiance. My breathing was steady, though I could feel my heart drum against my ribs. I found a seat in the center aisle, placed my briefcase gently on the floor beside me, and folded my hands in my lap. I reminded myself, tonight, I would not tremble. Tonight, I would speak. The band softened their music, and the hostess, glittering in sequins, stepped to the microphone to announce Callista. Applause erupted. Callista glided forward, her smile stretching wider as though the world existed solely to adore her. She launched into her speech, talking of community, growth, legacy, and vision for expansion. Her words washed over the audience like honey, smooth, practiced, intoxicating. I watched as investors nodded, guests smiled, and reporters scribbled notes. The veneer shimmered, flawless on the surface, but I knew the cracks that ran underneath. I stayed seated, waiting, timing my breath with her cadence. My pulse buzzed in my ears. At last, mid-speech, as she spoke of her unyielding dedication to the company's founding principles, I rose to my feet. The movement was small, yet it sent a ripple through the room. Chairs creaked as heads turned. A murmur ran down the aisle. The hostess froze. Even the band's pianist fumbled over a key. Cameras swiveled in my direction like predators scenting prey. I walked forward. My heels clicked against the marble, each step magnified in the cavernous silence. Callista's confident smile faltered for the first time. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was steady, low, but unmistakably loud enough to carry. The hush deepened. "Why is my name missing from the company's founding history when these records prove otherwise?" The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Shock spread across the faces in the crowd. Paper rustled. Gasps broke through the silence. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Investors glanced at one another with sudden unease. I reached into my coat. My phone slipped free, its screen lighting up as if on cue, casting a pale glow over the papers I withdrew. The ledger, the truth bound in ink and signature. I placed it carefully on the lectern where Callista had been standing, the slap of leather against wood sharp in the silence. Callista blinked, her lips parted. For a moment, nothing came out. The audience leaned closer. At last, she found her voice. "Maybe you're mistaken," she said, her tone clipped, brittle around the edges. I held her gaze, unflinching. "I don't believe so," I replied softly, but the microphone carried every syllable through the hall. "These documents show that from the very beginning, I held equity. I helped build this. You and Mom and Dad rewrote it so it looks like I never existed." The words hung there. I could see the tremor in her hands as she tried to maintain her composure. She swallowed hard, the muscles in her jaw tightening. A sheen of sweat glistened along her temple, betraying what her painted smile could not. Murmurs spread. Investors shifted in their seats. Reporters scribbled furiously. The cameras zoomed in, their red lights blinking. A nervous laugh broke from Callista's throat, high-pitched and brittle. The sound echoed through the speakers like glass cracking. Her carefully cultivated persona, her polished image of control and grace, was unraveling in real time, and the entire room was watching. Then came the sound of hard footsteps. My father emerged from the side of the stage, moving quickly, his expression thunderous. He crossed the space with the rigid elegance of a man who had always commanded rooms. His jaw was clenched, his eyes sharp with fury. "You'll regret this," he hissed under his breath as he reached me, placing himself between Callista and me like a barrier. His voice was low, but the microphones picked it up. The audience heard. I didn't flinch. I looked straight into his eyes, my voice calm and firm. "No, Dad. I know exactly what I've started." For a moment, the world narrowed to that exchange. The father who had once dismissed me as nothing, and the daughter who had returned with proof that she was everything they tried to erase. His face burned red with rage, but I didn't back down. Callista tried to speak again, but her words caught in her throat. Around us, the press pressed forward, snapping photos. Flashbulbs popped, illuminating the scene in strobing bursts. The crowd whispered like a storm gathering speed. I raised my voice once more, letting it roll across the hall, steady and clear. "The truth is finally mine to tell." And in that moment, I felt the room tilt, the axis of power shifting. No longer was I the sister they branded as useless, the daughter written out of history. Tonight, under the chandeliers and the camera lights, with the ledger open for all to see, I was something else entirely, someone no one could erase again. By the time the night was over, the headlines had already written themselves. The sister who dared expose her own blood, the heir who returned from the shadows, the reckoning no one saw coming. And I knew this was only the beginning. I awoke to the distant hum of early morning news, my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. The first headline was blunt. Sister speaks truth. Expose shakes Vera Corporation. The accompanying image was me, standing behind a lectern, ledger in hand, gazing into the crowd with more resolve than fear. Overnight, my story became breaking news, and everything had changed. I lay still, letting the weight of that revelation settle. The walls of my small apartment felt both protective and prison-like. Outside, the city stirred. Engines, footsteps, the faint whisper of winter wind through barren trees. I rose, blinking away dreams, and moved to the window. From up here, the skyline looked indifferent, graceful towers unmoved by personal storms below. By mid-morning, my inbox overflowed. I sipped coffee at the kitchen counter, reading every notification. Talk shows offered two sides: brave whistleblower or vindictive sibling. One anchor questioned whether my actions had torn a family apart or revealed a long-hidden injustice. Another aired clips from last night, Callista fumbling over her words, her face pale under stage lights. Her PR team scrambled in the background. Then an email popped in from my parents' lawyer, a cease and desist order demanding I retract public claims or face defamation suit. My chest tightened, but as I stared at the ledger files open before me, I recognized the tone. Empty threat. I forwarded it to my lawyer, the one Mildred recommended, and asked him to draft a counterclaim. Intimidation didn't frighten me. It provoked me. By afternoon, I sat with Mildred in her living room, bright with antique books and the scent of old tea. She placed her hand firmly over mine. You have to stand your ground now. They've dug their own grave. You're going to walk out of this with your head held high. We sketched legal strategies, filed initial motions, planned how to press for equity and truth rather than vengeance. That evening, my father came by unannounced. He stood on my doorstep, snow crunching beneath his shoes. His face was thundered, his posture rigid. I opened the door without inviting him in. You think you can destroy the family name with half-truths and papers? He spat, voice shaky. The hallway lights lit his stern face, but my heart didn't waver. No, Dad, I replied firmly, stepping aside so he'd walk in. You destroyed it long ago when you decided your youngest daughter was expendable. He paused, as though struck by the weight of his own words. The silence stretched, his nostrils flared, his jaw clenched. Nothing moved except the faint hiss of snow against the window. I turned and walked past him, leaving his anger to echo in the threshold. The peace of the moment was fragile, but mine. And though the night was cold, I felt warmer with resolve. The chains they tried to bind me with were never theirs to hold. They were mine to break, but freedom has a price, and I was about to learn what theirs would be. I woke to the low hum of headlines outside before the sunlight crept through my blinds. Chicago's skyline glared back in the window, steel towers indifferent to nighttime dramas. I rubbed my eyes, reached for my phone, and there it was. Every major outlet had run the story. Sisters expose topples Vera Corporation. Family secrets exposed in public showdown. From invisible to invincible, Daisy takes control. I slid out of bed and walked into my kitchen to brew coffee. The silence in my apartment felt like a new kind of calm, not fragile, but composed. I took a deep breath, gathered a mug in my hand, and read through dozens of articles. Some called me a heroine. Others said I'd burned bridges. One headline: a house of cards built on lies finally collapsed. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. My phone vibrated with messages, supportive texts, media requests, even a few from old acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. Most were cautious, but all were watching now. By noon, a friend dropped by with sandwiches, and I listened as she rattled off what she'd heard. Investors pulling back, board members resigning. Vera Corporation was hemorrhaging trust. I nodded, sipping iced tea. Yes, I said quietly. That's exactly what happens when a foundation is rotten. Later that afternoon, I got the formal notice. Callista was being investigated for fraud and document tampering. Regulatory agents had opened inquiries. My parents, once pillars of the community, were being whispered about at social clubs and civic organizations like personalities gone bad. Their contacts avoided them at church, at fundraisers, at the golf club lobby. Lifetime acquaintances no longer returned their calls. I felt no joy in their fall. Only clarity. My lawyer called midweek. The countersuit was approved. I would regain my inheritance, the shares and property rights that had been hidden. We would seek damages for the rewriting of my life. I told him I didn't want headlines, I just wanted my rightful place. He chuckled softly over the line. Justice doesn't need a spotlight. The day the verdict came, I stood thousands of feet in the air in my new office overlooking the river. The decision was sealed. The trust documents naming me were validated. The judge affirmed the ledger as genuine. My ownership rights were restored. I stood in that glass room, arms folded, letting the city hum beneath me. But victory didn't erase the deeper ache. Sometimes late at night, I wondered whether my parents ever regretted their decisions. I remembered childhood birthdays they missed, presents they gave to Callista, but not me, the way they sat in the front pew while I sat at the back of Sunday service. The word useless was taught to me, rote and heavy, before I even understood its cruelty. I realized justice isn't the same as love, and I would never confuse the two again. That evening, I took a walk down by the river walk. Winter wind gusted off the water, biting but clear. I wrapped my coat tighter and exhaled. Streetlights glistened off wet stones. I paused at a railing, looking up at the city skyline, familiar, new. They tried to write me out of the story, but I wrote the ending myself. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't fire, it's simply walking away whole. Sometimes the hardest battles we face are the ones within our own families, the places we expect love but find betrayal instead. Daisy's story reminds us that silence doesn't mean weakness, and walking away can be the most powerful revenge of all. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? What did you do about it? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories like this one. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard.